Well, thank you, and thank you for coming back so promptly. Now we're moving on to our first of our panel sessions that will be chaired by Professor Tim Wheeler. Tim is currently Deputy Director of International Science at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. His role is to champion DEFRA's group of science internationally and to provide a strategic coordination and direction to DEFRA's use of science and innovation to achieve positive international outcomes. Tim has more than 30 years' experience in sustainable agriculture, food and climate change research, with specialist skills in forecasting climate risks to food production. Welcome, Tim. The floor is yours for the panel.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Monique. Good morning to everyone in the room. Good morning to everyone who is online. I was pleased with that little break there. I was feeling a bit chilly, sat down at the front with this frosty morning that we have in the UK, so it was quite nice to shake a bit of warmth into the legs. But my goodness, there's going to be some warmth in this session. I'm actually delighted to be chairing a session that's going to focus on some of the projects that GCBC has been supporting under the general theme of contributing to global goals and the science behind global international frameworks. This will very much build from a lot of the information that we've already heard from Alex, Gideon and Kate, who have set out the sort of large-scale objectives that GCBC is looking to address. And actually, in Kate's talk, gave us a little snapshot of two of the talks we're going to hear a little more about now. So you've always had a bit of a heads up on two of our presentations that we've got coming up. As Monique says, I'm from DEFRA in an international science role, and my link with GCBC is that Dan McGonigal, who's sitting up there and runs GCBC on behalf of DEFRA, sits within my division. So Dan and I spend a lot of time talking about GCBC, but not enough time listening to the details. So it's fantastic for me to be able to hear that today. So we've got four presenters who are all sat down here who will take the stage and give their presentations one at a time. We're going to have Q&A after that, with all of us sat on these rather comfy chairs here. So do, as each speaker is speaking, think about things that you would like to ask as part of the Q&A, and online do think about putting those into the chat as we go through the presentations. As a warm-up to the topic itself, I had sort of three reflections thinking about the challenges of commissioning and undertaking research to contribute to global frameworks and global goals, such as those in the Sustainable Development Goals or the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework. Number one, well, as we've heard already, GCBC is a flagship DEFRA ODA R&D project. That's how we see it, and that's why we invest so much time and DEFRA support in it. But of course, the scale of the climate, nature, poverty challenges in that context, it's very small. And so it's incredibly important that in running GCBC projects and designing future calls, designing future programs, we look for those researchable problems that can almost catalyze change across nature, poverty, and climate nexus. Global framework gives us opportunities to almost operate at influence at a large scale, research activities that are carefully targeted and by their nature quite small investments of public monies. And number two, I think global frameworks also enable us to incentivize action. And although they are global, as we've already heard in some of the previous remarks, actions are in the main local, and we need to incentivize both local, regional, as well as global actions through the outputs of our research and the impacts that happen subsequent to the research completing. So local leadership's an incredibly important part of GCBC. Local action, equally, is absolutely vital. And then lastly, of course, the pathway from one individual research project to a change at the scale of a global framework. It's incredibly long, complex. There are a multitude of programs, projects right the way around the world that are needed and necessary to influence global frameworks. And so coordination is incredibly important, and that's why we're here over the next 2 to 3 days to coordinate across GCBC programs to achieve things by working together through individual programs, but by bringing those together to address the poverty-climate nexus. So essentially, that's our task, and I look forward towards the end of the week. We're catching up with Dan to see how things go over the next couple of days. But we're going to make a start in this panel session with 4 fantastic speakers. So let me go on to introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Constanza Gonzalez-Parral is a senior evaluation specialist at the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, 3IE, which is how I more usually refer to it. She leads on the GCBC Phase 1 project, Impact Evaluation, Conservation, Climate and Development, Understanding What Works. Constanza also leads the production of systematic reviews, rapid evidence assessments, and evidence gap maps on different sectors of international development, including education, governance, energy, and climate change. It's a very broad portfolio. So, Constanza, can I welcome you to give your presentation to start this session?
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. To start us off this panel, I would like to provide some snapshots, not about programs that have been implemented, but about the research about those programs. So we've been working with DEFRA for the last couple of years in a project that it's aiming to understand the state of the research, so that with that research, we're able to inform decision-making for policy, for DEFRA, for other organizations, and to ensure this connection between the best outcomes for climate, environment, biodiversity, and people. We have been intended to align with known frameworks, goals, targets, and to understand the state of the evidence on both sides, so where there is research and where there isn't a lot of research. Oh, I can see the whole slides in the TV. So we've done 3 phases. The first 2 were funded by or through GCBC. We started small in phase 1 a couple of years ago with updating an evidence gap map on land use change and forestry programs. Evidence gap maps would allow us to understand where there is evidence, where there isn't evidence, and we can categorize those studies across different intervention categories and outcome measures. So for that update of an EGM and evidence gap map that 3A published in 2016, we focused specifically on land and forestry. We tried to map studies that study the effects or effectiveness of these programs, so specifically impact evaluations and systematic reviews around management, laws, capacity building, around land use and forestry. We mapped those studies across some intermediate or behavioral outcomes, some environmental outcomes, mostly focused on climate mitigation, and a couple of human welfare outcomes. And the result of this EGM update was almost 600 studies, 3 times more than the original EGM. So then, for phase 2, we wanted to expand and acknowledge this connection between climate change, biodiversity, and people's lives, which we all know affects disproportionately those in low and middle income countries. So based on that, we did extended consultations. We drew from key policy strategies, national, international. We consulted with experts at DEFRA and at other departments and academics. Drawing from, for example, the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Diversity Framework, the review on biodiversity. And the outcome of that was a much larger EGM, in which we not only mapped studies on our focus on land and forest, but also agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries, and coasts and oceans. So incorporating a larger scope in terms of natural systems, and also in terms of outcomes. So we incorporated biodiversity outcomes, we incorporated a much broader understanding of what we want to see as human welfare measures. And maybe you're not able to read all of the categories labels, but you should be able to see the larger bubbles, the gray bubbles. And that means that where most of the evidence is concentrated. So we can see that even though there's a huge jump in terms of number of studies, those studies are mostly concentrated in the upper rows or in the upper categories of land and agriculture rather than on aquaculture and coasts. And either in intermediate or behavioral outcomes for environment and human welfare, but not that much around biodiversity and climate mitigation. So I would like to give you some examples. So the large increase in studies, it's contrasted with the high concentration, both thematically on land and agriculture, and geographically. And interestingly, we had that focus on both climate, environment, biodiversity, and human well-being. Only 16% of those studies were measuring outcomes at both levels. The EGM includes studies for 86 low and middle income countries. And some examples of how to connect this to, in this case, some of the SDGs. We know that one of the indicators for SDG 13 is greenhouse gas emissions. We only have studies for 20% of countries with at least, for 20% of countries, at least one study is reporting this type of measure. We also know that there are particular indicators and targets focused on least developed countries and small island developing states. We do have a larger coverage around least developed countries, but the EGM, the whole body of evidence, is only able to speak for 18% of those small island developing states. For SDG 15, there is specific indicators around forest coverage. A good amount of evidence is reporting those type of measures, land or water coverage. However, there is a specific indicator around biodiversity, naming explicitly the red list index. None of these studies report this particular index. And for a third of the countries, we have studies reporting either species or habitat complexity measures around biodiversity. And then for the current third phase, we're doing a deep dive and a smaller window for all that huge evidence gap map. And we're conducting a systematic review, not surprisingly, on the intervention category, intervention group that has the largest amount of studies, so land and forestry. I focus specifically on these three particular intervention categories: community or decentralized management and monitoring, protected areas, and land rights. I was going to say that I shamelessly took this image from the GCBC website, but I think that we all agree that it's a very nice image, and it translates very nicely how we are thinking about this systematic review. So because the systematic review is ongoing, this is a more rustic view of what the evidence looked like for the systematic review. We can see with the green cells are those intervention categories and outcomes that we were able to conduct at least one quantitative meta-analysis. So incorporating pooled or average effects across programs. What can we learn not only from one program, but for the group of all programs available? So we can see that we're able to say interesting, and we can learn that, for example, there are small but positive significant effects on some or most of the intervention categories on natural resources management measures, on land cover, on productivity, on income. However, when we look at the gray cells, those also tell us a story about where there is evidence that is missing. We're not able to say for this particular scope of, for the systematic review, we're not going to be able to say much about effects on greenhouse emissions or on nutrition or clean air outcomes. And you can also see that for the different intervention categories, we don't have the same evidence across the three. So the evidence does change across interventions and across outcomes. And here you can see the broader scope of what we are aiming to understand for human welfare, to understand more how adaptation can be measured and how these programs can affect those adaptive capacities. So to conclude, I just want to go back to the overall objective of this project in the first place. So yes, we can identify, and we should be leveraging where we should be leveraging the areas where there is evidence to understand what works for this connection between climate, biodiversity, and people's lives, so that we can inform policies, future programs, upscaling, and those decisions for DEFRA and for other organizations. However, this kind of a stock-taking exercise should also make us aware of where there are gaps in the evidence and how that reflects on future decisions about research itself. And for us to understand what is that we are, for this particular type of evidence that we're looking about what works, what is it that we're not able to talk about, but even that it's interesting, we're not conducting research on those areas. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Constanza, for those comments in our initial presentation. So for our next presentation, I'd like to welcome Dr. Asta Gebrekurtos. She's a senior scientist at the Center for International Forestry Research, C4, and World Agroforestry, C4 ICRAF, based in Ethiopia. She's the lead for GCBC project Multifunctional Agroforestry for Ethiopia, and is involved in several other projects in Africa and in Asia. Asta is a leader in her field with over 20 years' experience in research, teaching, and consultancy, and also is the head and founder of the Dendroecology Lab in Nairobi that focuses on looking at what trees, forests, and forest-dependent communities have to say in order to address climate change issues and the effects of forest use, and the effects of climate change on biodiversity and ecosystems, all of which are incredibly relevant to the discussion today. Asta, could I welcome you to give your presentation?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to online participants. It's really a pleasure to be here to share about our project, Multifunctional Agroforestry for Ethiopia. And I hope at the end of my presentation that you will be convinced that agroforestry is really a pathway to reach the global and national, targets. So I'm going to present on behalf of the team, C4ICRAFT team, partners from 3Aid, University of York, and especially the farmers and all who contributed to this work in one way or another. So I will just start with brief context about major challenges of our times. It has been discussed, raised by previous speakers, and global initiatives and agreements and insights from the project that Kate highlighted. Thank you so much for that, and some conclusion. So there are major goals of our times: achieving food security, addressing climate change, conserving biodiversity. These are global goals. And when you look Africa, developing countries, there are many, many challenges, including deforestation. Ethiopia is rich in biodiversity, but there are many, many challenges that threatens its biodiversity. This one is not my recent slide, presentation, but I will just follow with this one. Yeah. Is it possible to change? I can give, if you give me 20 minutes then. Okay, so because I cut some slides because of the time, but I think he could give me 2-3 minutes more. Okay, so going back, so, it's rich, but we have many people to feed and population pressure and what have you. And deforestation, some pictures are self-explanatory. You see, deforestation, land degradation, decreasing land productivity, and lack of fuel wood. This picture I would like to highlight. I took it 2 years before on the way from Aksum to Shire. Look, it's just bare land. That is collecting fuel wood, just twigs. And people are using cow dung for fuel wood if they are rich. And girls, they walk street for hours. Many challenges. Fodder scarcity. Some animals are clever. They can jump the tree. There is scarcity of fodder. But this is also aggravated by climate change. This happened 2 years before. This is from my country, Ethiopia, the worst drought in 40 years. And you see many livestock died. And people are being used as source of to plow the land, like oxen. This is a tragedy. But it's not only the cows and the cattle, but here you see kids climbing on the tree. It's not for fun. They are trying to survive. It was drought, there was conflict, and they were collecting wild fruit trees to survive. So you see the importance of trees as well in terms of shocks and drought events. But unfortunately, trees and forests are also being threatened by climate change. We see along in Europe, also in Africa, you see the map here, tree mortality is increasing across the globe. So can our trees and forests and woodlands adapt enough to climate change is also one of the major challenges we have to address, and is part of this project. And of course, if temperature is increasing and drought is increasing, tree mortality will also increase. So there are so many global initiatives and agreements to address these challenges that I mentioned, like UNCBD, like UNCCD, UNFC. I like to look at events and milestones. I can talk about each of them, but I don't have time for that. But all of the 3 event frameworks, they were established, Rio in 1992, and we had 3 COPs in 2024. So at the beginning, they have focused on their own thematic issues. But eventually, all the challenges are really interconnected. especially the common focus on ecosystem services, resilience, sustainable development goals, shows that these global challenges are really interconnected and integrated solutions are critical. So agroforestry can bridge the scenarios and the SDG. Agroforestry can address each of the SDG goals. It can address poverty, income, city, equity, and what have you, all of them. It can be addressed with our agroforestry. So that is why we propose, this multifunctional agroforestry for Ethiopia to address all the challenges that I mentioned to reduce poverty, food security, and boosting income. In fact, agroforestry is not new science. It has been there for many years. Ethiopia, we have many traditional agroforestry practices. But these traditional agroforestry practices have been threatened by many factors. As I said, there are so many social, climatic, and ecological factors that threaten these traditional agroforestry practices. But also, it's not widely adopted in the country. So we selected 4 regions in Ethiopia, 2 traditional agroforestry practices. One of the sites is a World Heritage Site. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site so that we can learn. It's really like, a mecca for agroforestry, I would say. So then this is the conceptual model we follow. It is trans-regional, it's transdisciplinary, at the same time integrative. We look at the past climate, present, and future. Climate change impacts, biodiversity, and human connection is at the center. But most of all, at the core of the project are the local people. Their knowledge, their vulnerability, their perception, and all that is key. Then, agroforestry is a system approach. It's not just only about trees. It's about the soil, it's about the crops, it's about the tree, it's about the biodiversity. So it's incorporating the values that the local people, especially the human, element is critical. How does people value, see, and their role from homestead to the landscape is very important. What do they plant? Here, sometimes they plant the wrong tree at the wrong site. So we see the whole landscape approach. Then, because it is so diverse by its nature, the crop, animal, soil, and climate, and all that, we bring different stakeholders. We establish multi-stakeholder innovation platform to ensure that, also the participation of underrepresented communities, indigenous communities, you see the Abagadas, also part of the innovation platform. So we discussed, because it has to be owned by the community, otherwise it will not be successful. Then we discussed with them and we told them, asked them to, list the challenges and rank them. And in different regions, it's context specific. From region to region, the challenges are different. And the solutions are also, we follow this option by context approach. The first thing is, I didn't actually expect, they said population pressure is the main challenge that threatens agroforestry. The second is lack of, this productivity loss. The loss of indigenous knowledge is degradation of the indigenous knowledge, local biodiversity loss, joblessness, migration, and all that. These are challenges they list about 15, 17. So following that, using what they want, we implement the project. And of course, gender equity is very critical. Also, we organized women-only meetings and all that. And especially, I would like to highlight here the importance of intergenerational, to bring the youth to the meeting, because these are the future stewards of their landscape. And one of the challenges of people they mention is that lack of this degradation of indigenous knowledge. The youth, they are losing interest. So we have to attract the youth to really follow, to learn the wisdom from their elders. And of course, in our project, we also have 1 year from participant, 1 year old participant. So the intergenerational, is really, they are empowered women. They bring their kids, and it's really amazing to see that commitment of the women for this project. So we also, it's not only about the traditional knowledge, but also we use scientific activities like the Kesho participatory scenario building, and the GIS tool is led by University of York, Professor Robert. We were discussing with people, and we asked them, how do you see your future with agroforestry, without agroforestry? So we'll develop scenario development, 2030, 2063. It's not only the GIS, we are also establishing living labs. As I said, climate is impacting our trees, our people, climate, what have you. And one of the challenges of, the reason for loss of biodiversity is lack of knowledge on indigenous species. You've been to Kenya, you will see grevillea and eucalyptus. Ethiopia, eucalyptus. So that this critical knowledge, because it's easy to propagate exotic species. So we are installing different equipments to monitor the impact of climate change and to understand, their physiology, how they coexist. You would find out more than 30 species in half-hectare of land. How do they coexist? And different layers, multi-layers. So this understanding, there are competition, there are also complementary processes, happening in agroforestry. It's really dynamic and system approach that we use. Then we'll develop resilience index, species diversity models, and to plant the right trees. This is our motto at C4A. Planting, it's not about planting trees, it's about growing trees at the right site for the right purpose. And agroforestry also, the microsite condition is also critical. So it's not only about the science, but whatever we do, it has to make economic sense for the farmers. Livelihood. Why do they plant trees? They have to benefit from that. They have many challenges. So we are using different approaches for that. One of the challenges for, that agroforestry being threatened is a lack of available quality germplasm, seedlings. So we are organizing the youth and women. We bought different nursery equipment, as you can see, it's the right direction. We give them training and all that. We negotiated with the government to give us nursery site. That has been not managed very well. In Ethiopia, nurseries are, mainly government-owned, which is expensive, and they produce only eucalyptus and, some grevillea seedlings. So they gave us the land for 3-4 years, and then depending on the outcome, they will, continue the agreement. So already they are generating money. Of course, seedling production takes time, but we allow them also to produce incentives, like onion, garlic, and what have you. This is short-term benefit. So this is critical. And this migration is very challenging in this area. They say, they use as they are migrating. They are not following the tradition. So this is one of the challenges they mentioned, and this is a way to stop that gap. So this is in the south. This is Salam. She was in the picture, and this one is from Tigray. And we are also establishing pilot best fit agroforestry practices by selecting farmers, 50 homesteads, as model farmers for each region. And we are giving you the different seedlings and training and capacity building, and we follow up. It's also a living lab. It's on-farm trial. And already they are harvesting and getting benefit. It's about intercropping of different things, including vegetables and all that. It's powerful. So it's not only about producing, but also it's very important to raising mass-scale awareness through different techniques, because access to knowledge is access to action. So we are showing that, generating and showing evidence about the interconnectedness of biodiversity, climate resilience, and food security. We had national platform at the higher level, bringing different ministers of agriculture, forestry, and finance, and what have you. And the government, they are so convinced about our approach, they broadcasted on TV, on Tigray TV, on South TV, Southern TV, reaching many people. Also, we are sharing our, this model, the approach, how to scale up and out at the UNCCD in Riyadh. So it's very important that to engage national governments, because it can be part of the policy. That's how we influence, global and national targets. And now the government, they have approved also, this restoration, and agroforestry, 60% of the restoration target will be with agroforestry. So this is the evidence that we have. We have published many blogs and papers and TV programs, and it was also on the Salamta, Salamta magazine. It was January, February magazine was also highlighted the project. So it is really, interesting, I would say. And in conclusion, agroforestry is part of the 3 Rio Conventions. Indirectly or indirectly, it aligns with the goals. And I don't want to take more time, it is. But what is done? Long-term investment at scale. Because trees by nature, they take longer time to build trust, to show them the impact. At least 5 to 8 years of investment is really critical for agroforestry. Then it can scale up and out. Thank you so much to all of you for your attention, and on behalf of the core team and all the partners, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Asta, for that comprehensive overview of the role of agroforestry. So to our third presentation of this session, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Wendy Toro. Wendy is principal researcher at CIASE, which is a feminist NGO focused on promoting human rights, particularly economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. She leads the GCBC Stage 1 project, Grand Tesqual Indigenous Reservation Climate Plan, that focuses on enhancing the living conditions of the Pastos indigenous people residing in the Grand Tesqual Reservation. Wendy is a specialist in environmental education and management. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you today to give your presentation.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks to GCBC team and Dai for inviting me to this panel. I'm Wendy, and for me it's an honor to be here on behalf of the Gran Tesqual territory and the CIASE Corporation. In Spanish is Corporación de Investigación y Acción Social y Económica, CIASE. The Gran Tesqual Indigenous Reservation is based on the southern part of Colombia, and this is a sacred territory in the Andean Amazonian region of Colombia. Climate change and biodiversity loss are global crises that have a profound impact on indigenous peoples. However, these communities are not merely victims of this crisis. They have also developed concrete strategies to adapt and protect their territories. The climate plan of the Grand Esqual Reservation, developed in partnership between the Grand Esqual community and CIASE Corporation, and funded, of course, by GCBC, is an initiative based on fundamental approaches that enable us to build a transformative research and action model. I want to share with you which are these approaches. First of all, we have feminist and gender approach. Of course, as a feminist organization, we recognize the central role of indigenous women in protecting their territory and biodiversity, ensuring their activities participation in decision-making. The intersectional approach, that is understanding that gender, ethnicity, class, and another kind of identities, inequalities affect communities directly in the face of the climate crisis. Ethnic approach that strengthening indigenous autonomy in environmental governance, respecting the Pasto people, knowledge and authority systems. The colonial approach that is challenging the power structures that have historically marginalized indigenous peoples and validating their knowledge as an essential part of environmental science. And of course, climate resilience approach, not only resisting crisis, but generating structural transformations and enable the community to adapt and ensure their survival in harmony with the territory. These approaches have ensured that research in Grand Esqual is not just an academic exercise, but a tool for resistance and territorial transformation with an impact on global decision-making spaces such as COP16 on biodiversity that was hosted by Colombia last year, and COP29 on climate change that was hosted by Azerbaijan. About the research part of our project, from the initial proposal of the climate plan of Grand Esqual, it was established that the foundation of the process should be generation of indigenous knowledge, starting with a participatory biodiversity diagnosis that this assessment has enabled us to map the state of biodiversity in the territory, identifying key spaces and environmental threats, develop the illustrated botanical guide, there is this one, integrating the traditional knowledge of the Pasto people with scientific information about plant species in the territory, create environmental monitoring methodologies where indigenous guards, women, and youth have played a central role in data collection and ecosystem observation. Dialogue of knowledge approach in research. This process is not based in a hierarchical relation between science and ancestral knowledge, but on a horizontal conversation where both knowledge systems complement each other. The community has been the protagonist in knowledge production, ensuring that the proposed solutions respond to their needs and worldview. Thanks to this work, the reservation has been able to generate its own data, which has not only been useful to the territorial planning, but had also been crucial for advocacy in international spaces. This enabled us to participate in the COP16 on biodiversity in Cali, Colombia, where we present our research findings and defend the need for indigenous peoples to be recognized as key actors in implementing the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. At the COP16 on biodiversity and in Baku, in Azerbaijan, Our participation focus on highlight the role of the indigenous peoples as guardians of biodiversity, with concrete examples of the Gran Tescual community. Questioning conservation financing mechanisms that continue to exclude indigenous peoples on their self-managed initiatives. Showcasing the illustrating botanical guide of the Gran Tescual community as an example of the indigenous knowledge building, combining ancestral and scientific wisdom. This process did not end at the COP16. Recognizing the need to link biodiversity with the climate agenda, we have projected our work towards COP29 on climate change, with an emphasis on the role of the Andean and Amazonian ecosystem in climate regulation, recognizing indigenous leadership in developing nature-based solutions, the need for direct funding for indigenous adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage projects. For COP29, we were seeking the strength and advocacy for the Gran Tescual Reservation as a model of climate resilience based on indigenous governance and community science. About the challenges and opportunities, despite these advances, we face several challenges. One is the limited recognition of the indigenous knowledge in climate and environmental science. Lack of access to resources to continue indigenous research and environmental management. The need to develop more effective advocacy mechanisms in COP negotiations. To overcome these challenges, we must promote indigenous research as a legitimate field within academia and environmental policy. Demand direct decision-making spaces at COPs, not just as observers. Strengthen networks between indigenous communities, researchers, and international actors. The experience of the Gran Tescual demonstrates that when research is built from the territory and with the active participation of the community, it generates data and knowledge that impact global policy. In conclusion, and finally, indigenous research is not just an academic exercise. It is a tool for resistance and transformation. Thanks for the work carried out with the Gran Tescual Reservation, we have produced our own knowledge on biodiversity and climate change. An example of this is this document that we are really proud of. Brought these findings to COP16 on biodiversity and COP29 on climate change. Positioned the reservation as a key actor in building transformative resilience. But this is just the beginning. To ensure the sustainability of this process, it's crucial that academia and the research community recognize and validate indigenous knowledge as an essential resource of climate and environmental science data. Support and accompany indigenous participation in international decision-making. Establish alliances that respect the autonomy and governance of indigenous peoples in managing their territories. Gran Tescual has taught me and Ciase and all the team that we are working in this project that resilience is not just resistance. It's the ability to transform realities through our own knowledge. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, and thank you very much, Wendy, for your presentation. Very thought-provoking. So, to our final panelist before we get to our Q&A session. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Ritini Teng, who is Director of Policy and Program Development for the World Conservation Society based in Cambodia. She is the lead of the GCBC RGC2 project, recognizing and rewarding the contribution of indigenous knowledge for the sustainable management of biodiversity that focuses on identifying innovative solutions to support indigenous management of biodiversity in partnership with the Bunong people in Keo Sima Wildlife Sanctuary in eastern Cambodia. Ritini has significant experience in environmental policy and work within this area. So I'd like to welcome you to give our fourth presentation of the session.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Good morning, all. Thank you for opportunity to deliver presentation and a panel discussion today. And just a bit of change is not a world conservation, but wildlife conservation societies. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really happy for our presentation today. So we start our present today on the recognizing the reward of the indigenous knowledge to sustainable management of biodiversity, and so to show how this project is linked to the national and the global framework. So we can see that our project just started in November recently, and currently we just start a discussion about our like internal discussion and also different stakeholders regarding the implementation of the project. And our project is led by the WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society, and under the support from the GCBC. And the project is implemented by diverse partners, including the Oxford University and Royal University of Agriculture based in Cambodia, and CIPO, called Cambodia Indigenous Organization, and Monash University. So from the international research university and to the local organization. So the project is implemented mainly in Cambodia at the Red Plus Khao Sema Wildlife Sanctuary, and it's located in the eastern plain of the Cambodia. So if you don't know Cambodia, where is it? So there's, and the location of the project you can see in the Cambodian map is highlighted that in the eastern plain of Cambodia. Yes, this is the map location of our project that we will be implement. And this research particularly is under the broader scope of the Khao Sema Red Plus project that contribute to the implementation of the Red Plus activities in the ground. And as you know, the Red Plus Khao Sema Wildlife Sanctuary is under the jurisdiction management of Ministry of Environment. And our project is, the Red Plus project is co-implementing by the WCS and the government of Cambodia. And the project is starting in 2010, and the term is expected to implement for 60 years. And this project is a high of carbon density of any Red Plus project in Cambodia. Also, it is a central and the current home of the indigenous community called Bunong Indigenous Group. More than 70% of the population in that area is indigenous communities. And the location, more than 1,000 species have been recorded recently. and 85 is global threatened species. So why are we doing this research project? Because we realize that the recognition of the indigenous rights to manage biodiversity is limited, and also limited the evidence of the knowledge and the governance of the indigenous community. So because the community is living there and have managed and used the forest for generations, and have a knowledge in forest and biodiversity management. And Cambodia is unique in this region for legally recognize the collective indigenous communities. For example, like in the Red Plus Cao Sema project, we have supported collective land title for indigenous communities. However, we support several communities, but up to now, we got only 7 that issued the land title to the local communities, and the rest of the registration is under the process. It takes like more than 10 years in the process, because it is involved different ministry, involved 4 ministry. For different ministries, so it take a while. Like it really challenge. It take a long time in this, and also so in this slow process, it lead to the community kind of fragmented and vulnerable to the new market force as well, and also this create the conflict between the government, a conservation authority, and reduce effectiveness of protecting measure of this area. And so what will we do regarding this research project? So the project will be implemented by the Cambodian researcher with the technical support and mentor with the international partner like Oxford, as I mentioned earlier, and the Monash University. And this research have main 3 actions. Firstly is the action research led by the indigenous community to document the knowledge and recognize through the co-development the governance models. And secondly is kind of the ecological research to quantify biodiversity and climate mitigation outcome of indigenous practice, that including the impact evaluation of indigenous collective land title on the forest cover, and also measure biodiversity outcome of the indigenous land. And the third is like economic research to develop the model of the financial mechanism to support indigenous management. So our project outcome, we can see that we would like to have a clear, generate a clear and robust evidence for the incentive and the governance model for the better recognize and reverting of the indigenous knowledge and sustainable management of the biodiversity. And those also empowers indigenous community to advocate and recognize of the traditional knowledge and management practice of their engagement and sustainable finance mechanism. And the community also have the evidence so for them to advocate and negotiate with the government and other stakeholders to recognize their rights and practice, and also to inform the implementation of the Red Plus program including the design incentive mechanism and using the evidence and the knowledge for indigenous community, and also the strengthen the capacity of the communities and also the community research that engage with the policy in Cambodia. So how the project contribute to national and international framework? So that looking at the national framework, Cambodia have a set of framework around forest and biodiversity conservation, including like national determined contribution and national biodiversity strategy and action plan we call NBSAP, and circular strategy on the environment, and those are implemented by Ministry of Environment, and the National REDD+ strategy. However, I focus primarily that this research is contribute to the NBSAP, and the Cambodia currently in the process for updating the NBSAP to align with the Kunming-Montreal Protocol framework. So it aims to conserve biodiversity and promote sustainable use of the natural resource and ensure that equitable sharing of the benefit arrive from the biodiversity. There are several targets in the projects that are contributing to the NBSAP. However, I particularly take just an example like target 17, but the new NBSAP that we update is target 22 that related to respect and integrate of the indigenous knowledge and local knowledge for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity resources. So the project will document the indigenous knowledge and cultures. So on the forest management and biodiversity conservation, which can be inform the implementation of the NBSAP. So in the international framework, so we can see that Cambodia is one of the parties in different international conventions to tackle the climate change, biodiversity loss, and promote sustainable development, which including the UNFCCC and biodiversity convention on biodiversity, and also the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So the research is can contributing. I just take an example, particularly regarding the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, like target, for example, target 21. It related to data available information and knowledge for decision maker, practitioner and public. So where several articles and policy brief will be produced as the evidence for the decision making. And as well as example in target 20, so strengthening capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technical support cooperation for the biodiversity. So this project involves different partners, including the Oxford Monash, which can provide to our local partners, and as well as the action research that implemented by the local community. So this kind of capacity building to the local and our partners. And also the research also contribute to the implementation of the REDD+ as well. So as the implementation of the REDD+, we have the standard that we need to follow. One of the standard is called climate community biodiversity. standard. So this is the standard to safeguard communities and also safeguard and also respect the knowledge and right of the indigenous community, because for the implementation of the RED Plus, we need to comply all the these standard in order to pass the validation and the verification in order to able to sell the carbon credit. So we need to pass all of this verification and comply with all this standard. Yes, I think that was my presentation, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brittany, for that presentation. What is the youngest, actually, project of the four, the one that started most recently? So could I invite our three other presenters to take a seat on, it's not a stage, but in the row here. Leave one for me. Maybe if I sit at the end. So we've got the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters across everything that we've heard this morning. We can take questions in the room. We can take questions online that I think will come from the team over here. Yeah. Lottie, yeah, Julieta. So please think about those questions. I'm going to kick off by just asking a question for each of our presenters to respond to as you form the questions that you want to ask. So let me just take a seat here. And Constanza, maybe starting with you, but the same questions for all four of you. At times there can be a bit of a disconnect or gap between global frameworks operating as you'd expect at a global international scale, goals, targets, and indicators of those, and the perspectives of people that are most affected. And we've heard from at least three of the presentations, some examples of those people. Do you see this disconnect in the work that you're doing? And if so, how do you navigate that? And starting with you, Constanza.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So the idea, one of the wonderful advantages of having these tools as the evidence gap map, the EGM, is that we're able to take a look and try to quantify those disconnects. And one example of that is one of the main takeaways from the evidence gap map around climate change, biodiversity, and livelihoods is the lack of evidence around what we call equity considerations. So we go to the studies and try to identify how authors applied equity considerations in terms of how they designed the research and how they analyzed the evidence. And from the 1,600 studies that we saw in the EGM, just over 10% of those studies include an equity consideration in their research approach, most commonly by providing and reporting disaggregated results by sex. That's the main approach. So we see a disconnect there in terms of how the research is conducted. And if we take one step further into the systematic review on land management interventions, we see a similar pattern. I think 15% of those studies present any disaggregated analysis by gender, by sex, by age, indigenous communities. So really those studies are mostly focused on averages that generalize the results of those effects of those interventions. So I think that the first question is around how do you connect that and how do you target programs so that they are involving those populations more affected, but also how do you conduct the research so that it translates into research approaches that also address those concerns.
Thank you. Asta.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can tell that there is a disconnect between this global and local, focuses, because the global targets, they are more broad, but the local is really local. It's about the immediate benefit. It's about the food, water, and as I've been showed you, the problem is not about the carbon sequestration, for example. It's not, it's about food, it's about water, it's about job opportunity, it's about maintaining their tradition. But then how do we bridge this gap is very important. It's based on the approach, involving the people from the start, showing that, although I will not go to the people and say, this plant tree for carbon sequestration. But I will tell them, trees are very important for food, for feed, and for water, especially water, they can relate immediately. But carbon is kind of abstract. But then the carbon is additional benefit. You can get this, but additionally, it's also carbon benefit. There are global, this climate change is impacting you because of CO2, and so then it comes later. So it's very important is the approach, involving them, considering their priorities in the project is very important. The other thing I said, okay, planting trees, it will take 3-4 years or 5 years, So they don't have to wait all that. They can produce, like the onion, the vegetables and all that. Then they can, take part in the project. Immediate benefits, incentives, capacity development, empowering their kids. This all is, they can relate with this global objectives of biodiversity loss. They know. It's really, actually in the south, in the northern part, it was number 3. Biodiversity loss was the highest because there was conflict, there was siege, there was massive destruction, as I showed you, and they lost the bees and all that. So they mentioned biodiversity as number 3. The first was peace and all that. So it is depending on the context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, for us, it's really evident that we have that disconnection. Of course, working with the indigenous reservation community, we have this lack in advocacy processes, for example, and in spaces like COP16 on biodiversity or COP29 of climate change, we have these disconnections because the agreements on biodiversity and climate, all the others agreements, are based on a technical approach. And we said, or in Colombia or the Global South, we said, it's a Western point of view. So they don't take account our best perspectives, our ways of life. So there is a disconnection. For us and in the Grand Esqual indigenous community, we try, like several strategies, but I just want to highlight 2. One is, as I said before, we try and we are working on create our own knowledge, trying to have these research products and put in the table the dialogue between the indigenous knowledge and that we call the Western science or the Western knowledge. So this is our way to recognize the indigenous communities have a knowledge, that is really important to highlight, and it's really important to put in dialogue with another kind of knowledge. And the second is making alliances. For us, it's really important, and the way that we could arrive to those spaces, the COP16 and the COP29, we're making alliances with other actors, mainly public actors in Colombia, because, for example, we were invited by the environmental secretary of the governance of the Nariño department, that is the state in Colombia where we are working, to be part of the COP16 and some spaces of the Green Zone. So without this alliance, it would be impossible to be there. So for us, it's really important have these alliances, and to the private sector, of course. We know that this is impossible without the private sector, and we have some alliances with organizations of the civil society and other organizations that work with us and are mainly working, trying to, for example, support our work in researching and trying to support our activities. But we know that we have to do more, but from the community or the indigenous community, we know that these efforts are impossible, for example, without this kind of spaces, this kind of projects. So for us, I think GCBC has been a really important opportunity to highlight all these gaps and trying to fix them a little more.
Thank you very much. And really.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that for us, regarding the implementation in the ground, we can see that in the global framework, we have like a goal to protect and conserve biodiversity, and as well talking about the inclusion and equitable participation of the local community. However, in the perspective of the community, it is involved with like cultures, and they live in the area for many, many years. But the government have been established this protected area, but the community living with involve their culture and practice. So and also the participation of the community in the decision making is also has the limited and a gap as well in the practice. And as well, the community looking at the livelihood improvement, and as well as the capacity for participation and the capacity for they are able to protect the biodiversity and encourage them to participate. And also the global framework should also include regarding the, I mean that not the global but also national framework include that self-determination and culture to include in those framework as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all four of you for that initial questions. So let me go to the room. Are there questions? Let's take one in the middle first, please. And there are microphones somewhere. There.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello? Yeah? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, thank you all. They were wonderful presentations. I really enjoyed them. My name is Cristal Angie. I come from Colombia, from an NGO that does very similar work to the one that was shown. And what I wanted to share is that in the last 20 years working with indigenous knowledge, we kind of realized that we had been doing work or trying to understand and do research, but it was very much from a Western point of view. So even though we were very open, we were having dialogues and we were working in, let's say, finding out what the animals in the reserves were or doing, this is a very much Western way of working with knowledge and organizing knowledge as well. So in the past maybe 5 or more years, we've been including in our work supporting the indigenous ways of researching, which is already a Western word. But what I mean by that is, how do people understand and get to know animals? So in certain parts, it's through rituals, through maybe taking sacred plants and then connecting to the plant and learning from those plants. Or also the way of conserving nature might be doing certain rituals in certain places. And the interesting part of that is that then usually it's very hard to get funding for that, because that means a category in the budget that it's usually doesn't really fit anywhere, or that it doesn't make sense to funders, like buying certain strange things that are needed for the rituals, for example. So my question here for it, and I think any of you can answer it because you all talked about this, is if you have developed ways of working in these dialogues that stems from the traditional ways of knowing of the indigenous cultures and not having a dialogue on just on what we call research in the Western world. And also, if there's maybe time, Tim, for you too, if how from the funders' perspectives do you see funding these types of activities that are usually kind of out of the box? So any of you can answer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 questions there. And maybe you and I will speak during the lunch break on the second so that we can maximize our time with the panelists. While you're thinking about that, can I just add one more question in? Would someone else like to add to? Yes, please. Microphone's coming behind you.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm Julie Nieto. I come from Ecuador. I found also all the talks very interesting. Thank you for that knowledge and wisdom. I have a specific question for Dr. Astor Gebrekirstos. Is that right? I think it's very interesting to work with communities and associations. But in our work we're working with mangroves and working with fishers associations. They feel so much empowered with their own association that there starts being conflict among associations, among those who want to implement these changes and those who don't agree. How do you deal with that? Or if you have any ideas of how integrating the ones that are not very much aligned, and then how to solve those conflicts or stressing points. Because that's something we foresee we might be seeing in these things that are changing, and some people want to implement different strategies and the other ones do not agree, and we're in the middle of it, so we just want to foresee what to do. Thank you.
Great, another fantastic question, thank you. And perhaps, Asta, should we start with you, as you were mentioned specifically,
Okay.
and then open up to the others on the first of the 2 questions?
Yeah,
Please.
okay. Thank you. I think I will mention about the first question about the traditional, the indigenous knowledge. I would say, I mean, what I like about the GCBC project is that it really recognizes also the traditional knowledge, the importance of that, and that we need to consider in our work. And it's a scientific, it's also research and development. So in our case, the traditional practices are key. We want to learn from them. We appreciate that. And it was interesting. They asked also for the scientific aspect, because they say, okay, we are growing on the, this is a mountain area, different elevation. The species are migrating. What they have been growing at lower altitude, they cannot grow anymore. So what can we plant now? So they were recognizing the importance of this scientific knowledge also. So I think it's a way, it's approach, and how we interact with them is very important. So maybe we have another experience, but in my opinion, I think it is actually one of that I like about this GCBC is about recognizing that. The second question, shall I continue?
Yeah, please,
with that?
yeah.
So it's about the association. In our case, what we did was we created association. small form of cooperatives. We negotiated with the government to get the nursery, and then we also consulted the local leaders and also the indigenous people, the Abagadas and all that, to select really people that they need job, some capacity, commitment, and also so they have to be youth and women. So we created the cooperatives ourselves, and they develop bylaws on how they operate. And we train them all the process, including the value chain, how they sell, and they become, it's kind of innovation of this business model that we created. So how much income they will get, how they will distribute the money, and if there is, of course, the group is dynamic, there will be maybe conflicts or what, and how to solve that, how they can remove somebody who is not agreeing to the principles, the bylaws. So it's very important, as I say, to have this clear, agreements and local bylaws on that system. So that's what we do. But also we brought, in the multi-stakeholder innovation platform I told you, we brought the coffee association, the sailors and all that as part of the platform, because this is very important. When you go to the farmers, they sell coffee maybe 120 birr, which is about $2, to the middlemen. And then the cooperatives, they sell it. So how do we really break this cycle of, inequity? It's not fair. So this is also, we are trying to solve this kind of problem by bringing cooperatives. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful, thank you. Would anyone like to briefly add something, Brittany, and then we'll go to online questions?
Yeah. I would try to kind of respond to Christine's question regarding the research. So I think that is one part of the our current research support by the GCBC as well. So this research is one of our main research is action research that is taken by the communities. And we are engaged with the community themselves to they are really how they're going to do the research. So we give the ownership to the community for a data collection and things like that. But with the technical advice or some of the guidance from the expert, but we give the community rights to document it. So they feel like they are really own the research and have the research. Yeah.
I just add one.
Yes, is it a small one?
It's just that one about the indigenous research. I mentioned about the living labs. It will be on their farm. They will monitor and they will be part of the research, even if it's Western kind of equipment. That's what I want to highlight.
Yeah.
They are part of in their farm. So, yeah.
Thank you, thank you. To someone, Lottie.
Is on? Yes? You can hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So there are two questions that have come through online. Unfortunately, I can't see the names, so I don't know who's asked them, but I will... oh, no, hold on. Sokowin from Cambodia. There you go. So one is specifically for Asta, and then the other is more broadly for the rest of the panelists. So it says, thank you for your interesting presentation on agroforestry in Ethiopia. You have very well explained the many potential benefits to long-term sustainability and soil health. With these many benefits, why is there low uptake across Ethiopia? Is the short-term productivity lower than in monocultures? And if so, how can you overcome some short-term gain for long-term sustainability? The second question is, in any other countries, are there success stories where indigenous knowledge and value influence policy-making process, benefiting indigenous community as well as for sustainable management and use of biodiversity? Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for those two. Asta, you're the favourite at the moment. You're getting directed questions.
Okay.
But that's an interesting one, isn't it? The long-term benefits of agroforestry. I'm sure you got some data on that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I mean, trees, they take longer time, depending on the species. So that's why we are stressing, it's very important when you design agroforestry projects that they can get something 3 months, a year, 2 years, and also maybe 30 or even 100 years for generation to come. So it's very, to combine different species, diversity, and income. So agroforestry is not only about planting also the trees. It's about the interaction. So we are planting fruit trees, fodder trees, timber trees for timber, and vegetables. Is the interaction of all that system. So I can give you an example of avocado. The avocado, they plant it fruits in 7 years. So what we did, we are giving them improved variety that can fruit in 2-3 years. And these avocados also, they are big, the indigenous ones, really tall trees. It's difficult for women to harvest these trees. So they are really keen. And one of the projects that I was implemented in another region, first they were skeptical. They said, no, we cannot plant avocado this 7 years, it takes a long time. But we told them, these are new varieties. Yeah, let's experiment them. So in 2 years, they started flowering, fruiting. And the demand was so high. So they were contributing their own money and asked us, please give us seedlings. The demand was so high. So then that's why we are developing this rural resource center concept to develop quality germplasm, demand-driven, market-driven, biodiversity-driven, quality germplasm in large scale. So we just gave 6 seedlings per household because that's all what we cut the project with, was able to do. But what they wanted is more than that, So this is one of why agroforestry is not adopted widely. The other is about, of course, the main challenge in the north is open grazing system. They plant it, and then because of the open grazing system, then it is destroyed. So it's changing the mindset of the people really takes time. It's not just planting trees, growing trees is easier than to change how they operate their land, how they manage their land. So that is how we focus. And we take farmers from the degraded area, areas where there is no agroforestry, to green area, how food secure they are, how nutrition secure they are when they have diverse ecosystems in their house. More than 400 kilometers, we transfer farmers, model farmers, to see the importance of agroforestry. And they change. And especially when you have then the local leaders, the farmers themselves, if they see the benefit, it's easy to really scale up agroforestry. So that's why we are having this traditional agroforestry practice. Of course, they have their own challenges, they have threats, but also in the north, Tigray and Amhara, where they don't have really wide agroforestry practice, so that we cross-regional learning.
Yeah.
There are policy and there are many challenges, but I think I will give chance to other.
No, very good example. Thank you. Would anyone else like to come in on the second question? At all? Or Lottie, could you remind us what the second question was?
Yes, so it's around, are there success stories where Indigenous knowledge and value has influenced the policy-making process, bringing the benefits back to the Indigenous communities as well as benefits for
success stories on working with Indigenous communities on sustainable biodiversity management? Or are those to come through these projects?
Okay, do you want to go or I will?
Yeah. I'm processing. For us, participating in COP16 was really important because it was an opportunity to participate in the process of the building of the new biodiversity policy in Colombia. And this plan has a special chapter of indigenous peoples in Colombia. And this has a special chapter too on women, indigenous people. So from the Grand Esqual community, we have some people participating in this process of building that plan, and it let us put some points on the table. For example, like you were saying about recognizing of the knowledge of women, for example, the nature of their work with the territory and the care of the biodiversity, and not just for being women. It's because we have a special connection with the land, the territory, the biodiversity, and this plan has a really special approach of women taking care of biodiversity and how the indigenous communities support this kind of activities. So that comes to my mind for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, I sort of feel we could go on for another half an hour, but we are scheduled to break for lunch. And so I think for those of us who are in the room, let's keep the questions and the conversations going over lunch. There's one for me, I note that, thank you. But to our panel, can I give our many thanks to you for that very rich conversation and those wonderful presentations. I mean, some key takeaways from me. I heard that evidence gaps are still remaining across this nexus between amongst biodiversity, climate, and poverty, whether that's on equity considerations, the oceans and coastal ecosystems I spotted on one of the earlier slides. We heard a lot about agroforestry. I like that phrase, it's central to the 3 Rio conventions, and I like that call for long-term action. And I think that applies across all of the activities that we've heard today. And 2 really important presentations about the central role of indigenous communities, their knowledge systems, their world views in maintaining sustainable biodiversity management in 2 different parts of the world, but there's probably commonality across those 2 examples as well that we'll take away. So research and evidence, long-term thinking, and the central role of indigenous communities. Thank you much to our 4 presenters for such a rich discussion and presentations. Thank you.